All right, attention. Hello there, listeners of We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Chalk Valley History Festival edition of We Have Ways of Making You Talk, where we've been more digressed and more tangential than usual. We've had all sorts of interesting conversations spread across big history to little tiny history, and now we're going to this for me.
And this is our last one.
It's our last one, but this for me is this. I'm gonna shut up in this one because I have this is something I know nothing about, which and to be honest, James, to get me to admit that is quite an achievement. So well done. I'm accused in my family of being a monstrous bullshitter and an expert on everything. So for me to lay down my arms like this in this situation is quite a thing. So we are joined today by Andrew Ziminski. Now, I think, James, you should do the introductions because...
Yes, very happy to. Andrew's a fine fellow, and he's a stonemason, and I'm always in awe of these artisans, people who can do incredible things with their hands. And Andrew's also written an amazing book called The Stonemason, A History of Building Britain. It's a personal journey through stonemasonry and architecture in Britain, from church architecture to the ancients. Talks about Stonehenge, West Kennet, Longbarrow, but he's also a closet listener to We Have Ways. And you have some interesting because your father fought on the other side.
Well, yeah. Hi, Al. Hi, James. Hi. Yeah, Dad's background was a bit of a mystery to me until he died, or until my mother died, and I was next of kin. And I wrote to the Polish section at RAF Northolt. Dad was Polish, and he died 10 years ago. And so I got this wonderfully photocopied sequence of documents relating to my father's history, which it raised an eyebrow, I have to say. So he was conscripted so he was in Poland. He was conscripted in 1943 into German army. He was in northern France, where he was guarding V2 installations, and by some deduction I sort of discovered that he was working at something called La Coupole, which is where they're going to fire the V2s. They could put together the V2s. It's next to the main rail track, and then use that as a firing point on London and elsewhere. And I can remember as a kid visiting this place, and Dad never mentioned it. We happened to turn up there and have a picnic, on the top of this giant concrete dome. And Dad just sort of went off and shuffled around, and, this was tremendously interesting for me, but never mentioned it. So, again, full of surprises. So he was only 16 or 17 at the time, and he, by 1944, this was called an Ersatz battalion, because the original battalion had been destroyed at Falaise. He got captured by Poles on the 8th of September 44, and he was in a pretty bad way, because I've got all his medical documents. He was operated on in a field hospital.
So he was wounded? Was he badly wounded?
Yeah, well, he had this big chunk taken out, missing out the back of his calf, and he said it was in a motorbike accident, but it didn't really ring true. So it's just really interesting how he really wanted to, keep a lid on it. And you'd never, he just wanted a quiet life. He just wanted to keep his head down, not really be Polish. He didn't have any Polish friends. He was happy, but self-contained, like so many.
But Andrew, once he was captured by the Poles,
yeah,
he was in a bad way. So he was sent to Britain, sent to England on a ship, or on a kind of hospital ship or something.
So he was operated on, and he was sent to POW Camp 185, which is in Gloucestershire. Then he was sent back out. They basically said, "You're going to join us." He went, "All right."
So he then fought with the Poles.
Well, I know he did end up in Wilhelmshaven, where the Poles took the surrender of very satisfyingly took the surrender of the what was left of the German fleet, or the Nazi fleet. So and that's it. There's a very useful guy in Werner, Mr. Werner in Belgium, who really helped me out to place where Dad had been. So with the La Coupole connection and all that sort of thing. But Dad was an expert in building with concrete. Our old house was concrete everything. Extension, door handles, flower pots. He was mad for it. And they were carrying on doing dragon's teeth in Scotland after the war. He was saying. So a lot of my childhood was coloured by going around these weird places associated with his past that I didn't really. I also wrote to I shouldn't really say this. I wrote to the German record in Berlin, and they told me about the battalion that Dad was in and all that. Ersatz Battalion 211. I still owe them €8.50, but they can whistle for that.
But so when did you? But your dad became a stonemason, didn't he? Or have I got that wrong?
Yeah, no, that's completely right. So he at the closure of the war, he was offered a commission, but he'd seen enough, and he could earn £12 a week working on hydroelectric scheme, so blasting the tunnels under mountains. So he was good with the explosives, so he was in charge of a team that was on the face blasting under Scottish tunnels. And too many of his, so this was mainly Highlanders, Irish, lots of Poles, no English, he said pointedly to me, I remember. But too many of his mates were getting squashed. There were collapses all the time, and he had the sense to take up an opportunity to work as a granite stonemason. So he was working on the water openings, the outflow of the actual installations themselves, cutting voussoirs, and I remember going to this one, dam hydroelectric scheme, and I liked the permanency of that. And he would take me to the quarry and explain how it worked, and so yeah, the rest is history, really.
So that's where you got your interest of stonemasonry from as well, was it? From him?
Yeah, I think that was a seed, but I'd always been interested in the past. And when I was so rubbish at school, and there was a building in our town that was being taken down by the Weald and Down Open Air Museum in Singleton, and I'd watch this being slowly vandalised when I was a kid. Quite enjoyed it, but then our history teacher said, why don't you get involved in that? And that was it. I did used to just bunk off school the whole time, and got involved in that. And then the moment this building was put back up a few years later, I just volunteered at the museum, and that was that. So I'm a sort of I'm a stonemason traditional builder. So modern. Well, I know about cement, obviously, but modern gypsum plasters and plasterboard and all that, don't know. So
are you keeping working methods alive then? Is that what one of the things you're doing?
Yeah,
which always sounds to me a bit like a bright idea rather than a sort of practical thing to do.
Yeah, you're completely right. But there is a big role for traditional craft skills in working with historic buildings. You can't unpick these buildings with modern techniques and modern materials. But that said, if I'm working in a workshop, I use angle grinders and air tools, and I've got to earn a living. I've got to be realistic. So everything's done on a price. Everything's competitively tendered. So I've got to be realistic. But when I'm on site, I use traditional lime mortar, which is where gluing stones together, and lime washing, and traditional materials. So.
And these techniques, they're properly ancient. Some of them, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because after all, you were talking about concrete earlier on. Concrete, for instance, has been around for a very, very long time, hasn't it? Actually, the Romans used concrete, didn't they?
Yeah.
I thought I knew nothing about this, but there's one thing I know. This is great.
There's a posh hotel near us called the Newt, and they're building a Roman villa there at the moment. A reproduction Roman villa. They'd found the foundations, and I'm making this type of Roman floor there called Opus Signinum, which you can travel from. You can travel from the waste of Syria to Hadrian's Wall, and you will find this sort of imperial standard of mortar, flooring, and walling and pointing. And it has it's basically lime, which is fired limestone you fire limestone in a kiln at a lower temperature, and then to that you add crushed terracotta tiles. There's something called a pozzolana, which is that makes it set underwater. So no opus signinum, no Roman harbours, no aqueducts, no arches, no domes. So it's Roman cement allowed the Roman Empire to expand. Yeah. Much like concrete allowed the German Empire to expand.
Because I've been to Herculaneum in Israel, and there's an underwater constructed concrete harbour there. and we were shown around that, and that's an amazing site with hippodrome and everything, and you have to get your head around the idea. They knew exactly what they were doing with this material 2,000 years ago, didn't they? They were, in fact, masters with it, genius builders with it.
Exactly. It's that it's that standardization. Yeah, it's like with German cement mixes, they were standardized. Like the cement mix in the wall slayer and the Atlantic wall was the same, but obviously towards the end of the wall, the quality of that cement was lacking.
Yeah, but Andrew, okay, so I want to go on to kind of really ancient stuff in a minute, but I want to build a bunker on the bluffs above Omaha Beach in Normandy. Tell me how I do it. What is the process of building a bunker? Because the Romans might have loved concrete back in the day, but in the 20th century there was no one that loved concrete more than the Nazis. I mean, they were just obsessed with it. You think about the gargantuan edifices that are still around all over the place.
Are they Nazi megastructures, James, by any chance?
Well, they are actually Nazi megastructures, Al. Yeah, some pretty megastructures, to be fair. Although actually not that many megastructures on the Atlantic wall at Normandy. But just say I want to build a bunker. How do I do it? What's the process?
So the secret to a successful bunker is to ensure a ready supply of. So you have to have all the materials in place, ready to go, and all the labour and all the shuttering and all the steel reinforcement. Everything's got to be ready to go. You can't.
So what's the shuttering? Shuttering is that's the wooden planks you put around it to kind of it's like a mould effectively. Isn't it?
Exactly so. So with our diddly little pillboxes we have over here, they're basically they're shuttered with bricks. So you see the pillboxes on the stop lines, always brick covered, aren't they? But what the contractors would do is build the bricks first and then fill it with an infill of cement of varying thicknesses. But the Nazis, they were way ahead of the game, and they would construct the shuttering. So this is the wood ply that goes all around, much the same as every type of modern, all the tower blocks that are going up in Manchester and the City of London. It's all the same technique. It's basically carpentry and poured wet material. But yeah,
so that would literally be a mould effectively. So you have shuttering on either side of the thickness of the wall.
Yeah.
So it's and then you have those rods, don't you? What are they called? I can't remember what they're called.
Yeah, just reinforcing bars.
Steel reinforcement.
Reinforcing bars. Yeah. Rebars. That's it. And
rebars.
then
Pretty good.
Yeah, and you put those in, and then you literally just pour it in.
But you have to. A bunker won't work if it's not poured in one go. So the moment you have a day work joint, so all the slaves go off and have a tea break, or there's a bombing raid or something. If there's an
interruption to the process, it puts a fault line in basically. It weakens the entire structure.
Yeah, and I've seen this in certain. You can see where they've had to leg it or whatever, and it's been hit by something. And you were talking about it the other week where the HMS Ajax hit the big guns.
Oh, at Lons-sur-Mer.
Yeah,
Lons-sur-Mer,
I've seen that, and there's a bunker there that's shifted just very slightly sideways, so it wasn't cast in one go. So
really,
yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, they really fucked that up.
I've got to say, Al, for someone who says you know nothing about this, you're showing a little bit of knowledge here.
Well, it's being explained to me quite brilliantly. So basically, there's some bloke with an enormous bowl of concrete or mixer with concrete, and they blow a whistle and they pour it all in, and they hope not to be interrupted, and they leave it to set. And how long does this concrete take to set? Is it like several days, or is it? Or is there a reagent that can speed up or slow down the process, all that sort of thing? Well,
you can add fairy liquid to make it more workable and slow it down, but I don't know what their equivalent was out there. But that's what we use these days. Makes it more aero-like. It puts more air. It's an air entrainer, adding detergent.
Really?
But I remember they used to sabotage. Certain groups used to sabotage German concrete by putting sugar in, and that was thought to weaken it as it hardened, but actually had the opposite effect. It did make it stronger.
Really?
Yeah.
So what are we talking about? A few days? A couple of days? To dry?
Oh well, so a good sized bunker could take well over a week to make, and there'd be 50 or 60 people working on that. carpenters, slaves, labourers, steel reinforcing people.
Yeah.
So, this is just constantly going 24/7. There was no let up. 'Cause, as you say, the moment you get that weakness, off you go. They'd have to put a steel floor in quite early on. So they didn't generally put floors in, but they when they were pouring it, as the weight of the mix pressed down on the sort of lower mix that was hardening, it would sort of balloon out the sides. So they then introduced steel floors to suppress that bubbling. But with their cement bags, they would push that in the shuttering, and then you quite often see these sort of, it breaks up the surface, so it's less smooth, so it's better camouflaged, and you see that.
One of the things they got, the problems they got in Normandy is they just don't have the transport. So getting the materials to where they want to build it is quite tricky, and so you see this massive drop off in quality of bunkers in Normandy, and they're using too much sort of pebbles and
the best concrete. The best concrete is crushed granite comes from somewhere else in France. So, like you're saying, using pebbles on the beach is just rubbish. Yeah, so quality drops in everything towards the end of the war, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, Andrew, we're recording this on the eve of the summer solstice because it's a leap year, so longest day's tomorrow, the 20th of June, and you and I are kind of sort of plotting about the possibility of going up to Stonehenge to see the sun rise, or not, as the case may be, if it's too cloudy. But you've done quite a lot of study of Stonehenge.
There's an image there we need to just address for the regular listener. Are you wearing a loincloth for this? What's the...
I'm in a full druid kit.
Do you have a druid kit packed away somewhere, or are you going to be wearing khaki of some description?
I think Stonehenge is about 12 miles as the crow flies from where I'm recording this at the moment, and I have never ever got up for the summer solstice, and I just thought, this year it's lockdown, I'm going to do it, and Daisy's going to come with me. Ned's crying off. He wants to go and see his mates tonight, so he's crying off. But Andrew's been quite a few times in his life, and you've done quite a lot of work on Stonehenge, haven't you? You've done quite a lot of study of it and how they did what they did, and you've worked out how they got the stones there and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought it was fascinating. The bit that you it's just amazing, Stonehenge, isn't it? Because it really is a remarkable structure. It's not just that kind of when you actually break down what it is. It is truly, truly remarkable.
Then what is it?
It's a giant scientific instrument where the humans are the moving parts. So that's quite a good answer, isn't it? I'm pleased with that.
It's amazing. I'll buy that for $1. Yeah.
So by we're all familiar with the point where the sun rises on solstice, midsummer solstice, but more importantly is there's an axis line that runs through the stone circle and henge itself that's aligned on the midwinter sunset, and that's the most important date in the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, in their agricultural year. So it was about establishing with accuracy and some celebration, the best point to start their animal husbandry or whatever they did. Stonehenge always strikes me as you have these images of clad savages dragging these massive stones over, through forest and over open downland. But, the River Avon is a dead straight line, runs in a dead straight line from Pewsey pretty much to Stonehenge. And all the fields around, on the downlands around Pewsey were just littered with Sarsens, and they are still there in places, these great Sarsen trains. So it just seems sensible to me that they would have put it on a river that was 3 meters, the River Avon is a piddly little thing now, but at its upper reaches, but it would have been 3 meters higher. The water table was 3 meters higher back then, so they would definitely have rafted and punted it down. Of course, the water table would have been even higher in the winter. So,
well, of course they would, because that's the easiest way to do it, isn't it? I mean, that kind of after all, we don't think of rivers the way people did. In the past, do we? The rivers have become they're not a means of transport anymore. We've forgotten about that, haven't we? So it's anachronistic not to or ahistorical not to consider that as a way of moving the stones, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was, the River Avon was one of the major communication routes at that time for moving, for movement of people and ideas and livestock and, flints. And the thing about Avebury, which I think I'm more interested in Avebury because I've done a lot more work there over the years than around Stonehenge. We worked at the United Reformed Chapel. It's the only Christian building built within a stone circle. And that was built from stones from, previously stones that were standing that they smashed up, the Puritans smashed up because...
they didn't like them.
Yeah, they didn't like all that paganism. But the earlier medieval church they built without, it was outside the henge. So, the Saxons were wary of this place back at that time.
And what's Avebury then? If Stonehenge is a scientific instrument with human beings as the moving parts, what's Avebury?
I mean, you've got a whole complex there. It's a great piece of landscape art, really. But I think it's just, it's down to luck and circumstance. The Ridgeway runs right past, which is the one of the principal trackways in prehistory. It's the watershed for three rivers: the River Avon that goes to Bristol, the Avon that goes south to the Channel and comes out of Hengistbury, and the Thames. The headwaters of the Thames rise there, just by Silbury Hill. So everything was focusing there. And there, in southern England, that part of southern England, there are no other large deposit, or there are no other really solid stones. It's all chalk, isn't it? So they're going to go, crikey, this place is a bit special, and it still has a special vibe to it today.
So what work have you done on that site then? What sort of stuff?
Okay, so the United Reformed Church was absolutely chock full of dry rot, and it had been pointed with an inappropriate cement mortar. So and it had been rendered inside with cement as well. And cement, as I'm sure many of your listeners and correspondents will know, is death to old buildings. It's non-permeable, so it doesn't allow old buildings to breathe.
Yeah.
So there we took all this hideous render that had only been applied a few years before, and reused it, repaired it with, replastered it and repointed with lime mortar. So pretty run-of-the-mill sort of buildery stuff. But there are lots of areas of collapse on these outside walls, and they were built of sarsen. And over the years, I've, Andy, my business partner, and I collect. You see a pile of sarsens that the farmers swept to the side of his field. We go in there and get them because can't go to home base and get them. So so there. I've got a good pile in. Sarsen buildings are not. They're really damp inside. So most of the cottages around Avebury and around that part of the world are not. Furniture tends to rot in there. Strangely, so it's not a great material to. So it's like the ancients had the last word, I
don't know anything. Is this we're talking? Here we go. Primary school, Bronze Age, Stone Age, Iron Age. What we're talking here?
So the earliest building I've ever worked on is at the West Kennet Long Barrow, which is 3,750 BC,
Dear God.
or thereabouts. That's Stone Age, so that's Neolithic. So there's Paleolithic, which is sort of time of hunter-gatherers. There's Mesolithic, which is the sort of transition to roaming communities to slightly more settled. And then the Neolithic, you have the introduction of farming and that whole package, so settlements and all that. So because farming was such a successful concept, effectively the people had time on their hands to create these amazing structures. And then Avebury predates Stonehenge. I think there was a bit of an arms race going on between a couple of tribes because they were both sort of going up at the same time, but and then Avebury fell out of fashion and Stonehenge really kicked off around about the time a community from the Low Countries came this way called the Beaker people. So burial changed from family interments in graves like the West Kennet Long Barrow that were venerated for hundreds. West Kennet Long Barrow was in use for 1,000 years, and then it was sealed up by the Beaker people. They put these stones over the front, and when Stuart Piggott, the great archaeologist, excavated the site, he found a single beaker piece of beaker pot under these, like it had been placed there purposely, saying, right, this is our time now, your ways are gone. So there was a big change in burial practice at that time. So it was more solitary and personal. People were buried with grave goods, their beakers, hence the name. As that developed, so as Stonehenge developed, Avebury is just a bunch of rocks basically levered out the ground and put into position. There's no indication that they actually, there's no astronomical alignments at Avebury or anything like that. It's just stones lifted in position and, to create this extraordinary thing. So it's more of a mystery really. But Stonehenge has a definite purpose, and it's built with architecture in mind. It's built with a degree of entasis, which is a classical concept. So the shoulders of the uprights just pop in to counteract the illusion of concavity between the upright stones. Anyway, I could go on.
No. It's fascinating. Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. And we're back. Is Stonehenge? Does it attract a lot of attention because it's big? Are there other? Because I really do know nothing about this. Is it because it's so enormous that it's had all our attention? Are there other sites in the UK that perform similar sort of astrological functions? Just haven't got Stonehenge's glamour and size and all that sort of thing. Are we right to see it as so unique and special? Is it normal for that time, if you sort of
brilliant. That's such a great question, because Stonehenge is an absolute one-off, and I have absolutely no idea why there are not Stonehenges all over Europe. People were travelling to Stonehenge from bringing trade goods from across the British Isles, from across Europe, and why was its concept and its scientific purpose not translated?
What I thought was fascinating was that there's this understanding of perspective on Stonehenge.
If you actually stand within the circle, which unfortunately none of us are going to be doing this year, and look up, if you look at the lintels, the horizontal stones, they're not carved with a flat face, they're carved with a very slight curve along the front and back faces, but they also are carved so that the top part projects further than the bottom part, and that's to make them look even higher than they are inside. And again, that's a sort of neoclassical concept. So it was so groundbreaking, and the fact that they used carpentry joints to hold it all together. So these were like carpenter, mason, farmer.
Yeah. I mean, but maybe it went over budget. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe that's the reason there aren't any more. Because if you're talking about something that there's clearly. I mean, you said earlier on that the farming's so successful, people have time on their hands. It's that they can afford to do this and they're prepared to spend money on it. Because I always think when you look at medieval cathedrals, how expensive those buildings must have been, and this is the same thing, isn't it? Arguably, because after all, religion, if we want to call it modern religion, sort of is so keyed in to the seasons anyway. Actually, and our solstice is exactly as you say. The winter one's the most important one, because you're coming out of the winter rather than plunging further into it. Is it these people? They not only had time on their hands, they had the money to do this. They could afford to do this, which is quite extraordinary, isn't it? That you've got a rich society, in effect, haven't you?
Well, it really suggests a very strong community as well. I mean, there is a school of thought that because all the uprights at Stonehenge and the lintels, as I've just said, they're all dressed. So that means they've been the surfaces have been pounded away to give them a relatively flat surface, and there would have been thousands of people employed on that. But the thing is, sarsen is a sandstone, and the moment you start working sandstone, you create loads of sandstone dust, which will kill you. So you get this horrible disease called silicosis.
Yes.
So obviously. They were working as family groups, and I think just so many people died in the construction of it. Took the understanding of how to do it with them, really.
The one good thing that may come out of COVID-19 is that they might abandon this insane idea to build a tunnel underneath it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially where the exit portal on the west side of things is so ginormous and lit. And, the joy of Stonehenge is it's quite a dark, I've slept around there quite a lot on top of odd, bush barrow and all sorts. And, you get dark skies there. You can see the Milky Way. And there's no way that the exit portals are going to be anything but cultural vandalism, in my opinion,
Well, I totally agree. And once you've pulled out all that soil, once you've dug that ramp down and ramp up again, it's gone. It's gone forever. And huge amounts of archaeology taken away from it. And you've just carved up what is a World Heritage Site. And it's got to be absolutely clear about this. Those planned ramps are within the World Heritage Site area. They're not outside it. They're within it.
And is this to save 5 minutes off?
Which won't work anyway because the A303 isn't dual carriageway all the way.
No.
All you're doing is kicking it down the road. I mean, it's just a terrible idea. But anyway, hopefully it won't happen now. But Andrew, we've talked about Stonehenge, we talked about the Romans a little bit, but you've also done some pioneering work on church architecture, and I thought it was fascinating what you were saying about the origins of the great Gothic cathedrals and the fact that. Well, I mean, where that design came from. I mean, it's really interesting.
Well, again, it's about one of the things I'm really trying to hammer home in my book, The Stonemason, published by John Murray's, is the whole of the great human experiment is basically down to an exchange of ideas and cultures. And if there's no architecture of Islam, there is no Gothic architecture. If there is no Imperial Roman architecture, there is no architecture of Islam. So it's just it's just a constant handing on of the baton, really. And I absolutely love that. I mean, I've travelled.
But where do you think that comes from?
What war? The only reason we have Gothic architecture, one could argue, is because of the Crusades, and they, and that could be said not only for churches but for castle design. If you want to see a Crusader castle, there's no point going to Syria or the Lebanon. Go to Welsh borders. That's just all those oubliettes and all that sort of stuff. It's all translated from the architecture of Islam. But they got that from someone else. Like the Great Dome at Hagia Sophia. That was started as a church, didn't it? And that influenced all sorts of the dome architecture of Islam, which in turn influenced the spire architecture of Gothic, the Gothic movement. So
because after all, the world, when you have a universal church with the Catholic Church, which stretches from the British Isles all the way to Syria, the ideas are going to move, aren't they? That, and not just via trade routes, which is everyone speaks Latin. Ideas are interchangeable and move around in a way that, again, it's ahistorical to forget that, to think of countries as, I mean, France in itself doesn't even exist, for instance, in the way we conceive it. So of course these ideas would move in these ways. After all, and Tom's written about this, the idea that Islam comes through very much self-conscious reflection of Rome and what the Roman Empire is about and able to do. So, and of course they're rubbing alongside each other the whole time. That of course these ideas are going to seep into one another, aren't they? I mean, it's funny that in a way it's almost funny that you need to state this, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I was interviewed by a really good interview by a well-known broadsheet newspaper that's the precursor to the telephone, and oh my god, I was accused of virtue signalling and being woke because I was talking about this. I mean, fucking hell, give me a break, man. I'm just telling it as it is, you mouldy old twats. Just shut up. Sorry. It's just so pointless. I'm just, I'm a working guy. My eyes are open. I've got an opinion. That's my opinion. I'm not, flagging up.
No, but I think the problem is a misunderstanding of cultures and how they work. The idea that they operate kind of in sort of in islands, and after all, when cultures try to do that, they end up, for instance, the Inquisition in Spain becomes so powerful that Spanish universities fall behind. Spanish shipbuilding technique falls behind as a result of the Inquisition. So but by the Napoleonic Wars, the Spanish Navy is hopelessly out of date because they've had such an intellectual clampdown on their technology. They're not allowed to trade ideas with anybody, that they end up behind. So this idea that cultures occupy, and Spain, after all, is the great interface between Islam and Christianity, culturally and technologically, until 1492, when they're all thrown out, the Muslims are all thrown out. This idea that cultures don't bleed into one another and don't swap and don't rub up, and if you see a good idea, and if you've got any sense and you see a good idea, you nick it, don't you? That's the other thing, especially if you're working in the defence. If you think of castles as the defence sector. If you think of it like that, of course you're going to. If it's an effective way of building a castle, of course you're going to nick it, and also because people want the snazziest, latest stuff. This is just how people.
And it's the same with arches, as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, if you see an arch, you think, well, that arch, that's bloody useful, isn't it? Oh, I think I'll half inch that idea.
Yeah. Well, you can see it in Bristol at the cathedral. You can see that direct influence of Islamic engineering and Islamic architecture in the Lady Chapel. There is a couple of monuments in there, and at St Mary Redcliffe in the great doorway, the great southern porch doorway. I mean, I've never seen a more Islamic thing in my whole life, And that's, Bristol's the, trading in wine with that part of the world. Again, this exchange of ideas, booze, great,
Yeah. And if something's a new technique, and you're commissioning something, you want all the new designs, don't you? And I mean, it's all quite. The thing is, although it's all a long time ago, it's still people behaving the way people do, and also people who commission buildings behave the way they do now. If you're building a skyscraper now, you want it to look completely contemporary, and at the time, have a snazzy sort of Islamic arch or spire or whatever was the same thing, wasn't it? Basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not too sure about the architecture of Dubai, to be honest. That's a bit ghastly. But
I'll tell you what I am sure about, though, is the architecture of these cathedrals. And you get off you arrive into Durham Station, for example, and you look at the castle and you look at the cathedral just dominating the whole town. It just completely seems to fill the sky. And that's in the 21st century. But imagine what that was like when that was built in, whenever it was, 1,000 years ago. And the same with Salisbury. You spent a lot of time working there, Andrew, and obviously it's my home cathedral town. I look at Salisbury Cathedral, and you can do these amazing tower tours where you sort of walk over the vaults of vaulted ceiling, and you go up the actual tower, and you can stare up the inside of the spire. And I know you've actually gone to the very top of the spire, haven't you? But you look at that and you think, Christ, in the 14th century, how the hell did they do it? How on earth did they do something quite so complex without any kind of machinery whatsoever, without any of the kind of modern techniques, not the modern tools and machinery that we have today? And you just think, how could you have ever, if you're a peasant from Salisbury, how could you have ever doubted the majesty and magnificence of God when you look at that?
And the bells would have been the loudest sound you'd ever heard in your life. The loudest sound there was.
I guess, yeah.
Because that's the other thing, our world of sound bears no relation to what... So if you've got this building that's literally touching the heavens and makes the loudest noise there is, I mean, how could you? I mean, as you say, Jim, how could you draw any other conclusion than the church was right and was in charge? And
absolutely,
so
and the absolutely amazing thing about that spire is not only is it unbelievably tall and beautiful and delicate and just a thing of wonder. When you actually look, when you're standing at the top of so you've got the tower and then you've got the spire. When you're at the top of the tower, you're looking up inside the spire. It's got this lattice work of wooden scaffolding going up, and you think, so they just built it around that. But actually, I think I'm right in saying, Andrew, that there's not a bit of stone that actually touches the woodwork. The woodwork was just a scaffolding thing. So the spire is entirely freestanding. That is amazing. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. When was that finished? 1420 or something, wasn't it? Something like that.
13
something.
No, I think it was started about 1330. I've got so many dates in my head. I'm starting to lose. I was 53 last
anyway,
week. Anyway,
it doesn't really matter. But the bottom line is, it's a hell of a long time ago.
Yeah.
And how on earth do they make that?
Well, the windlass that drew everything up is still in there, which is a pretty mind-blowing thing. And that was used until the 70s. I remember the clerk of works saying to get stone up. And that, that's when I say,
and that's a great big wheel, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's a great big wheel.
So there's,
and you can move it with one hand, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. So it's so supremely well engineered and designed that, like you say, you can just move it with one hand. But it's that what's connecting everything we've been talking about, which I haven't really thought about before, was the use of timber. You've just been saying, James, about the use of timber as scaffolding. If you look at pictures of the bombed La Coupole, the amount of timber that's everywhere, and bunker construction, and the amount of timber used to build Stonehenge. Carpenters have been at a premium since the earliest times for support work and shuttering work and access work. No carpenters, no ability to create form work, or support for arches. So for example, with if you're building a nave, what you would do is construct the timber. You would construct the sort of negative of the arch, if you like, underneath it. You would build the arch on top of that. You would wait for the mortar to set. You would remove the wedges at the base, and it would drop down, and then you would simply move it along to the next section, the next bit along, and just redo it that way. Yeah. So it's these are clever.
When then the wood disappears, and you look at it now and scratch your head and wonder how on earth they did it. But they did it by basically building another cathedral out of wood.
Yeah.
And then filling in the stone.
But in all,
it's amazing. It's amazing.
In all large Gothic churches and cathedrals, they did build sort of secret walkways so that they could cut down on the scaffolding, so that they could carry materials up through the walls, if you like. And you can see that at Bristol and Salisbury and what have you.
Well, Andrew, listen, that has been really, really interesting.
Utterly fascinating. Thank you so much.
And I've got to say, I loved your book. It's The Stonemason, A History of Building Britain by Andrew Ziminski. It's such a good read. It was so fascinating. And it's one of those books where it's an utter joy from start to finish, but at the end of it, you feel you just know a little bit more about things, and that's that's a really nice way to be.
Oh.
So thank you. And this is our last one of We Have Ways of Making You Chalk.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, so to finish with stone with chalk, I think.
Yeah,
we've done quite well there, James.
Yeah,
it's almost like we planned this,
neat, isn't it? Yeah, but obviously
we didn't.
And we've just got to hope that next year we don't have to do this, and we can actually be at
do the real
festival.
thing. Yeah,
for real. Yeah. So long may, soon. Hopefully the normal times will return once more.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Really brilliant talking to you.
Yeah,
see you all soon.
Pleasure.
Cheerio.
All the best.
Well, thank you everyone for listening this week, and just to remind you that tonight is also